Welcome to Long Listen, a space for slow thinking in a fast world. This isn't a channel for quick summaries or surface-level takeaways. Each episode is a deep dive into books that challenge how we think, how we live, and how we see ourselves, from psychology and philosophy to modern culture and timeless literature. Why does someone making $200,000 a year still check their bank account every morning feeling anxious? And why can someone earning $60,000 feel genuinely calm and in control? With just those two questions, a lot of young people immediately recognize something familiar. You see the first type everywhere on Twitter, LinkedIn, even Instagram. Polished profiles, impressive careers, constant talk about investing, startups, side hustles. From the outside, it looks like success. But underneath, there's often a quiet tension, a constant fear of falling behind, missing out, not being enough. Then there's the second type. Their income isn't flashy. They don't flex much online. Yet they sleep well, don't panic at every market headline, and move through life with a sense that they're actually in the driver's seat. That difference rarely comes down to how much money they make. It comes down to how they feel about money. And this is exactly why the psychology of money is so different from most finance books. It doesn't teach you how to pick stocks. It doesn't promise fast wealth or a step-by-step path to financial freedom. What Morgan Housel does instead is much harder. He examines the emotional relationship we all have with money. Money is not just an economic tool. It's a deeply personal psychological story. Every person enters the financial world carrying invisible baggage. Childhood experiences, family attitudes toward money, the first time they struggled, the first time they earned more than they ever had, the fear of loss, and the pressure of constant comparison. Two people can look at the same chart and see completely different things. One sees opportunity, the other sees danger. One sees freedom, the other feels anxiety. That's why most arguments about money are not really about facts or math. They're about two life stories colliding. And if you've ever felt like you know a lot about finance but still don't feel at ease, the problem may not be a lack of knowledge. It might be that you're using the wrong language to talk to yourself about money. Most podcasts and YouTube videos about the psychology of money follow a familiar formula. They list out the key takeaways, highlight a few memorable quotes, maybe throw in a Warren Buffett example, and wrap it up with something like, "Be patient," or "Think long term." And to be fair, none of that is wrong. But there's a question that almost no one pauses to ask. Does this lesson actually apply to you? Or is it only true for someone who grew up in a completely different financial and emotional world? This is where a lot of well-intentioned financial advice quietly breaks down. We treat money lessons as if they were universal laws, like physics. As if one rule should work the same for a 22-year-old just starting out, a 30-year-old under pressure to catch up, and a 45-year-old who has already lived through a major financial shock. But money doesn't work like gravity. It works more like memory. What you've lived through shapes how you react, often without you realizing it. Think about how people react to risk. Some hear, "invest for the long term," and feel excited. Others hear the exact same sentence and feel their stomach tighten. The advice is identical, but the internal response is completely different. One person grew up watching their parents steadily build wealth. Another watched everything collapse during a crisis. When Morgan Housel says that financial decisions are deeply personal, this is what he's pointing to. We don't experience money as numbers. We experience it as emotion filtered through history. Most content skips this part because it's uncomfortable. It's much easier to say, "Here's what smart people do," than to ask, "Why does this idea make you anxious?" Yet without that question, advice turns into pressure. You hear about compounding and think you're late. You hear about taking risks and feel irresponsible. You hear about enough and wonder why you can't stop wanting more. The problem isn't that you don't understand the lesson. The problem is that the lesson is landing on unresolved emotional ground. This is why two people can read The Psychology of Money and walk away with opposite reactions. One feels relieved. I don't need to win big, I just need to survive. The other feels uneasy. What if I'm being too cautious? The book doesn't give a single prescription, and that's intentional. Morgan Housel isn't telling you what to do with money. He's showing you how people behave around it, especially under stress, uncertainty, and comparison. Money decisions are rarely made at our calmest moments. They're made when the market is falling, when someone else seems ahead, when life feels unstable, or when we're tired of waiting. In those moments, we don't reach for spreadsheets. We reach for stories we already believe about ourselves. I need to catch up. I can't afford to lose. This is my one shot. Those stories matter more than any formula. That's why blindly applying lessons can be dangerous. Not because the lessons are bad, but because they might be mismatched to your psychological reality. A strategy that feels empowering to one person can feel paralyzing to another. Context is not a footnote in personal finance, it's the main text. And until you understand your own context, advice will always feel slightly off, no matter how rational it sounds. Let me be very clear about this. I don't want you to listen to this, nod along, and then apply these ideas mechanically. I want you to understand why you react the way you do around money, why certain risks feel unbearable, why certain goals never feel like enough, why seeing someone else's success online can trigger urgency or shame in seconds. Those reactions aren't random, they're learned. When you start from that place, the psychology of money changes. It stops being a list of lessons and becomes a mirror. Instead of asking, "What's the smartest financial move?" you start asking, "What kind of financial behavior can I actually live with long term?" That shift matters, especially for younger audiences navigating constant comparison and uncertainty. Because the goal isn't to follow the perfect strategy. The goal is to build one that doesn't quietly sabotage you from the inside. At the heart of The Psychology of Money is an uncomfortable idea that most creators only hint at but rarely explore deeply. Our biggest money decisions are driven less by logic and more by invisible scripts running in the background of our minds. These scripts aren't taught in school. We don't consciously choose them. They're shaped by culture, social media, crises, and the quiet pressure of watching other people's lives unfold online. For younger generations especially, money has become a stage, a shield, and a verdict on self-worth, all at once. To understand how people actually behave with money, we need to talk about these scripts directly. Let's start with the first one, the most common and the most socially rewarded, the status trap. For many Gen Z and millennials, money isn't just about comfort or security. Money has become a form of public proof. Proof that you're doing well. Proof that you're not falling behind. Proof that your life is working. This is why someone earning $70,000 a year can feel an intense pull to drop cash on designer drops, limited edition sneakers, or hype streetwear, even when it quietly wrecks their budget. It's not about the shoes. It's about what the shoes signal. They say, "I belong here." They say, "I'm not struggling." They say, "I made it." Social media amplifies this script relentlessly. Every vacation a performance, every upgrade documented, every milestone posted, cropped, filtered, and optimized for likes. You're not just living your life, you're narrating it in real time. And when you see people your age buying houses, driving Teslas, or casually mentioning passive income, it creates a subtle panic. Not because you want their life exactly, but because their visible progress feels like an accusation. What's wrong with me? Why am I behind? Morgan Housel talks about how wealth is what you don't see, but the status trap trains you to chase what is most visible. The tragedy is that status spending feels rational in the moment. It feels like investing in confidence, networking, or personal branding. But over time, it erodes the very thing money is supposed to give you: optionality. You become locked into maintaining an image. You need the next raise, the next bonus, the next upgrade, not because you want more freedom, but because stepping down feels like social death. What makes this script so powerful is that it's rarely framed as vanity. It's framed as ambition. I'm just trying to keep up. This is the industry standard. This helps my career. And sometimes there's truth in that. But the line between strategic spending and status anxiety is thin, and most people cross it without realizing it. The result is a generation that looks successful on the outside, but feels financially fragile on the inside. The second script runs in the opposite emotional direction, but it's just as limiting. Let's call it the safety paradox. This one is especially common among people who grew up in the shadow of crisis: the 2008 financial crash, parents losing jobs, retirement accounts wiped out, then COVID with its sudden layoffs, frozen economies, and constant uncertainty. For many young people, these events didn't just happen. They were imprinted. They taught a lesson that never fully goes away. Risk equals danger, and danger equals stupidity. What's important to understand here is that these people are not ignorant. They know about compounding. They've heard that time in the market beats timing the market. They've listened to the podcasts and read the threads. But knowledge doesn't erase fear. And fear has a louder voice when it comes to money. For them, the pain of losing feels far more real than the abstract promise of future gains. So they save aggressively. They hold cash. They hesitate. They wait for the perfect moment that never arrives. From the outside, this looks like discipline. From the inside, it often feels like paralysis. Every decision carries the weight of potential regret. What if I lose everything? What if I make the wrong move? What if this one mistake puts me permanently behind? Here's the paradox. In trying to avoid all risk, you end up taking a different kind of risk: the risk of stagnation. Money that never moves also never grows. Opportunities that are never taken quietly expire. But the safety paradox doesn't feel like fear. It feels like responsibility. It feels mature. It feels like being smart. Morgan Housel's insight here is subtle but crucial. He doesn't argue that risk is good or that caution is bad. He argues that risk tolerance is personal, and pretending otherwise leads to self-sabotage. A strategy you can't emotionally stick with is not a good strategy, no matter how optimal it looks on paper. But the inverse is also true. A life spent avoiding every possible loss often leads to a different kind of regret: the sense that you never really played the game. The third script ties everything together, and it's especially common among overthinkers and perfectionists. Let's call it the one-shot myth. This is the belief that one wrong decision can ruin everything. One bad investment, one missed opportunity, one career move that sets you back forever. It turns every choice into a referendum on your entire future. And when decisions feel that heavy, procrastination starts to look like wisdom. Better to wait than to fail. Better to analyze than to act. The one-shot myth is reinforced by how we talk about success stories. We highlight pivotal moments. If he hadn't taken that risk, if she hadn't invested early, these narratives make life feel like a narrow path where a single misstep sends you off a cliff. But that's not how real financial lives work. They're messy, nonlinear, full of corrections and second chances. Compounding applies to mistakes too, not just gains. Most errors are survivable. Many are reversible. What Morgan Housel emphasizes, quietly but consistently, is the power of endurance. Staying in the game matters more than playing perfectly. The biggest enemy of long-term success isn't a bad decision, it's quitting after one. Yet the one-shot myth convinces people that the stakes are too high to move at all. It creates a mental environment where safety feels like stillness and action feels reckless. What connects these three scripts, the status trap, the safety paradox, and the one-shot myth, is that none of them are really about money. They're about identity, fear, and self-worth. Money just happens to be the medium through which those emotions express themselves. This is why purely rational advice often fails. You can't spreadsheet your way out of a story you emotionally believe, and this is the part most content skips. It's easier to say, don't compare yourself, than to unpack why comparison feels unavoidable. It's easier to say, take calculated risks, than to acknowledge that some people associate risk with trauma. It's easier to say, think long-term, than to recognize that long-term thinking requires emotional stability, not just intelligence. If the psychology of money has a real gift, it's this. It gives you permission to stop pretending that your financial behavior is purely logical. It invites you to examine the scripts you're running and ask whether they're protecting you or trapping you. Because until you do that, every piece of advice, no matter how sound, will feel slightly misaligned. The goal isn't to erase these scripts. You can't. They exist for a reason. The goal is to see them clearly, name them, and notice, in real time, when they're the one driving the decision instead of you. When you can do that, money stops being a constant source of tension and starts becoming what it was meant to be. A tool, not a verdict on your worth. If money is emotional, then what most people are missing isn't another tactic. It's a system. Not a spreadsheet, not a budget template, but a mental operating system for making decisions when emotions are loud and the future feels uncertain. This is where the idea of a money OS becomes useful. Think of it as the background software running every time you make a choice involving money. Most people don't realize they're running one at all. They just react. And reactions, especially under pressure, are rarely aligned with long-term well-being. A healthy money OS doesn't try to eliminate fear or greed. That's impossible. Instead, it builds in a quick pause. It slows you down just enough to ask better questions. Not, what will make me the most money, but what will I be able to live with? That shift matters, because financial decisions don't happen in calm laboratories. They happen late at night, after scrolling, after bad news, after seeing someone else's highlight reel. For younger audiences especially, complexity is not the problem. Overload is. There are too many opinions, too many strategies, too many right answers. A money OS works because it simplifies decision-making into something human and repeatable. Instead of rules, it gives you a short checklist, one you can run in your head before saying yes to a purchase, an investment, or a lifestyle upgrade. Here's the core of it. Every time you make a money decision, ask yourself 3 questions. How much volatility can I actually sleep through? This isn't a question about bravery or intelligence. It's a question about honesty. Everyone likes to think they're comfortable with risk until the numbers turn red. Volatility sounds abstract until it shows up in your bank account or your portfolio. If a 20 to 30% drop will make you obsessively check prices, lose sleep, or panic sell at the bottom, then that level of risk isn't for you, no matter how good it looks on paper. A strategy that works in theory but fails emotionally is not a strategy. Designing your finances around your real tolerance, not your imagined one, is a form of self-respect. Is this money serving the life I want in 5 years? This question pulls you out of the emotional noise of right now. It reframes money as a tool, not a scorecard. 5 years is far enough away to matter, but close enough to feel real. Not a vague someday, but a version of you that actually exists. Where do you live? How do you spend your days? What kind of freedom do you care about? When you ask this, some decisions instantly lose their appeal. Others suddenly make sense. Money is only useful when it's attached to a future you actually want. Am I doing this because it makes sense, or because I'm scared? This is the hardest one, and often the most important. Fear wears many disguises. FOMO, fear of falling behind, fear of looking unsuccessful, fear of regret. A lot of financial moves are emotionally reactive, even when they're dressed up as smart. This question doesn't judge the answer. Sometimes fear is informative, but naming it changes your relationship with the decision. Once you see fear clearly, it loses some of its power. Together, these 3 questions form a lightweight money OS. They don't guarantee perfect outcomes. Nothing does. But they dramatically reduce the chance that you'll make decisions you resent later. They help you align behavior with values, not noise. This framework connects directly with books that resonate most with younger readers right now. Die with Zero fits naturally here. It challenges the idea that more saving is always better, pushing you to spend intentionally on experiences while you're young and healthy enough to enjoy them. It forces you to think about timing, experience, and trade-offs, about using money while it can still meaningfully improve your life. Not recklessly, but intentionally. It asks a question most people avoid. What is money for, if not living? On the more practical side, books like The Simple Path to Wealth and I Will Teach You to Be Rich offer something equally valuable: permission to keep things simple. They strip away complexity and focus on behaviors that are sustainable over decades. Not flashy, not optimized to impress, but designed to work for real humans with emotions, distractions, and imperfect discipline. Their tone matters too. It's conversational, forgiving, and realistic, much closer to how people actually live. What all of these ideas share is a quiet rejection of financial perfectionism. You don't need the best strategy. You need one you won't abandon under stress. A money OS isn't about winning harder. It's about staying grounded when the world is loud and the future feels uncertain. When you have that, money stops feeling like a constant test and starts feeling like a support system for the life you're trying to build. Money doesn't measure how smart you are. It never did. Money measures how you respond to fear, greed, and time. How you act when the numbers go down. How you feel when someone else seems ahead. How patient you are when progress is slow and invisible. And the most important part is this: those responses are not fixed. They're learned, which means they can be unlearned. That's the quiet power of the psychology of money. It doesn't promise control over the market. It offers something more realistic and more valuable: control over yourself. When you start to see your money behavior as emotional rather than purely logical, shame begins to fade. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What am I reacting to?" That shift alone can change the trajectory of your financial life. Most people don't fail financially because they didn't know enough. They fail because they kept making decisions from the same emotional place over and over without noticing it. They chased status when they wanted security. They avoided risk when they needed growth. They froze because they believed one mistake would ruin everything. None of that is stupidity. It's human. The goal isn't to become fearless or perfectly rational. The goal is awareness. To notice when the status trap is driving the purchase, when the safety paradox is disguising fear as responsibility, when the one-shot myth is turning a normal decision into an existential crisis. Once you can name the script, you create space. And in that space, you get choice. So here's a challenge, especially for those of you navigating money in a world that never stops comparing, ranking, and pressuring. This week, when you're about to buy something on Amazon or about to all in on a coin or a stock, pause for 10 seconds. Just 10. And ask yourself one simple question. Is this a strategy? Or is this just an emotional reflex? If the answer is reflex, don't judge yourself. That moment of honesty is already progress. And if you're willing, take it one step further. Share your story in the comment section. What were you about to do? What were you feeling? Because money isn't a test you either pass or fail. It's a relationship. And like any relationship, it gets better when you start paying attention to how you show up.